interpretation icon on the Zoom toolbar. It may look like a globe on your screen. Once you join the Spanish channel, we recommend you shut off the main audio so you only hear the Spanish translation.
Para los que recién se unen a la reunión, interpretación en vivo en español está disponible y los miembros que deseen escuchar en español pueden unirse al canal. Para unirse, haga clic en el icono de interpretación en la barra de herramientas de Zoom, que ahora aparece un globo terráqueo en su pantalla. Una vez se una al canal de español, se recomienda que apague el audio primario para que solo escuche la interpretación al español.
All right, Madam City Clerk, I'm recognizing a quorum from the council. Let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. Do you want to go ahead and take the roll?
Scott, stop it.
Thank you. Councilmember Tibbetts?
Here.
Councilmember Schwedhelm?
Here.
Councilmember Sawyer?
Here.
Councilmember Fleming? Councilmember Alvarez?
Present.
Vice Mayor Rogers?
Present.
Mayor Rogers?
Here.
Vice Mayor Fleming, have you joined us? Okay, let the record show that all council members are present with the exception of Councilmember Fleming.
Great, thank you so much. And in the spirit of our Open Government Sunshine Ordinance, we do have interpreter services that are available today for Spanish. Madam Host, can you please explain how folks can access the Spanish channel?
Thank you, Mayor. You can join the Spanish channel to listen to the meeting in Spanish by clicking on the Zoom icon, interpretation icon on your Zoom toolbar. It may look like a globe at the bottom of your screen. Once you join the Spanish channel, we recommend you shut off the main audio so you can only hear the Spanish translation. Pablo?
Interpretación en vivo en español está disponible y los miembros pueden escuchar el español haciendo un clic en la barra de herramientas, ahorita que aparece un globo terráqueo. Una vez se una al canal de español, se recomienda que apague el audio primario para que solo escuche la interpretación al español.
Thank you, Mayor. To you.
All right, thank you so much. Just some quick housekeeping reminders for council members. Go ahead and keep your audio on mute unless you are ready to speak. Council members can unmute themselves, so just be a little bit careful. Staff will remain muted until they're asked to speak as well. And members of the public who have participated in today's meetings will be attendees. That means that their microphones and cameras will also be muted. Only today's panelists are going to be viewable during the meeting. If you're calling in from a telephone and choose to speak during the public comment portion of today's agenda, For privacy concerns, the host will be renaming your viewable phone number as resident with the last 4 digits of your phone number. It means when we call on you for public comment, that's also how we'll be calling on you. The City of Santa Rosa is committed to creating a safe and inclusive environment free from disruption. We will not tolerate any hate speech or actions and are well staffed to monitor that everyone is participating respectfully. Now, Madam City Clerk, can you please explain how public comments will be heard during today's meeting and how folks can interact?
Yes. After each agenda item is presented, the mayor will ask for council comments and then open it up for public comment. The host in Zoom will be lowering all hands until public comment is open for the agenda item. Once the mayor has called for public comment, the mayor will announce for the public to raise their hand if they wish to speak on the specific agenda item. If you are calling in to listen to the meeting audibly, you can dial *9 to raise your hand. The mayor will then call on the public who have raised their hands. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes and a timer will appear on the screen for the council and public to see. Once all live public comments have been heard, the meeting host will play voicemail public comments. If you provide a live public comment on an agenda item, but also submitted an email, e-comment, or recorded a voice message public comment, your email, e-comment, or voice message public comment will not be duplicated, read, or played during the meeting. Additionally, there are 2 public comment periods on today's agenda to speak on non-agenda matters at items 13 and 17. This is the time when any person may address the council on matters not listed on this agenda, but which are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. Throughout today's agenda, when the mayor calls for public comment, an interpreter will be prepared to assist anyone needing interpretation. Those using interpreter support will be afforded additional time for your public comment as required by the Brown Act. We ask that those listening on the Spanish channel but wishing to make public comment to turn off, leave interpretation entirely at the time you hear your name called so you can join the main channel to make your public comment heard and translated into English. This icon may now look like a circle with an ES in the middle and the word Spanish underneath. You can then rejoin the Spanish channel at the conclusion of your comment to continue listening to the meeting in Spanish.
Great, thank you so much. We did not have any closed sessions today, so we will go ahead and start with our first study session of the day. Mr. City Manager.
Yes. Item 3.1, Open Government Ordinance Review. Sue Gallagher, City Attorney, joined by Stephanie Williams, City Clerk, and Magali Tejas, Community Engagement Manager for this presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor Rogers, Vice Mayor Rogers, and council members. Sue Gallagher, City Attorney. And as the City Manager mentioned, we'll be providing today an update on our progress on the implementation of the Open Government Ordinance. I have with me, as again the City Manager mentioned, Stephanie Williams, City Clerk, and Magali Tejas, Deputy Director of Community Engagement. Next slide. So to begin with, just a little bit of background, which most of you I think are quite familiar with. The city's open government ordinance was enacted by the City Council on December 8th. The ordinance added a new chapter 1-10 to the city code, and that chapter establishes a series of measures to enhance transparency and to facilitate public participation and access to our local government. Recognizing that ordinance had a number of moving parts and that implementation was going to be somewhat complex, the council set an effective date for the ordinance of July 1, 2021. The council recognized the logistical benefits of a gradual rollout, and it encouraged staff to begin an early implementation, and we have done that. Next slide. The ordinance had 6 key elements. The first is for translation standards for the council's agendas, and also translation standards for council meetings. Second was enhanced agenda standards, and that relates to both the timing of posting of agendas and the contents of those agendas. Third was increased management of meetings for public convenience. Fourth, providing ready access to public records and data. Fifth is providing education for the community and staff as to enhanced transparency and public access. And then enforcement mechanisms for the ordinance itself. Next slide. So there's a lot to cover, but today what we'll do is we'll focus on the new translation requirements and on the requirements for early agenda publication. We'll review in each of those, we'll review the actual requirements of the ordinance. We'll let you know where we are in the implementation, and then we'll consider some of the early impacts that we're seeing. And finally, then we'll give a very brief status update on the remaining ordinance provisions. Next slide. So moving into some of the details of the ordinance provides that all council agendas, both preliminary agendas and final agendas, will be published in both English and Spanish. The ordinance also provides that all council agendas will be provided in other languages if the resident speakers exceed 5% of the city's population. Upon request, agendas will also be provided in languages other than those noted above at no cost, and they will also be provided in Braille or enhanced type of large type, all without costs. Next slide. The implementation of the translation requirements, the translation of City Council agendas is now in place, effective with the City Council's meeting of February 9th. The council agendas have been published in both English and Spanish. The county's Legistar website includes a forward-facing link to the Spanish agenda language, and we'll see that link in the next slide. And Gov delivery notices, those are the notices that are sent to individuals and organizations and alert them to new agenda postings. Those Gov delivery notices are now provided in both English and Spanish. And any interested person can sign up for Gov delivery notices on the city's website. Next slide. This is the city's Legistar website, and you'll see blocked out the link to the Spanish agendas. I note that this began with the February 8th meeting. And so if you'll see on the slide, that first listing for the February 2nd agenda, the translation was not yet available, but every meeting since the agenda is available online in Spanish. Next slide. The new translation requirements also extend into the council meetings themselves. The ordinance provides for live Spanish translation of all council meetings, all regularly scheduled council meetings. Special meetings and emergency meetings are exempted from this requirement. The ordinance also provides for Spanish translation of the final archived closed captioning. So the closed captioning is not translated live into Spanish, but once it's archived, it will be translated into Spanish. Then the ordinance codifies existing requirements for provision of telecommunication devices for speech and hearing impaired upon request. Next slide. So again, implementation is well underway. All regularly scheduled council meetings, that is our regular Tuesday meetings, include live translation. That began a few weeks ago, last week on March 16th. The online virtual participation document has been updated to include an explanation of how to access interpretation services. And we'll see that on the next slide. Also, as we've just walked through, the information on how to access interpretation services is also announced at the beginning of each meeting. Although we do not yet have translation services in place for the Spanish closed captioning for archived videos, IT is researching the costs and logistics for providing that service. Next slide. And here are the Spanish language instructions for virtual participation in council meetings. And this document is online and available to the general public. And we recognize that the online posting is not enough. And so staff has been and will continue to be looking at additional educational outreach opportunities to ensure that our entire community knows of the opportunities for full participation in the meetings of our city council, both by English speakers and Spanish speakers. Next slide. Implementation has triggered some additional costs. Staff estimates the total monthly cost for translation services, including translation of the council's agendas, the live translation of council meetings, and the translation of closed captioning, will likely total a little under $8,000 per month. And this estimate is based on the actual cost of translation associated with the council's February meetings and is an estimate for the closed captioning costs. And of course, these are just estimates at this point. We're still early on in the implementation of the ordinance. As this evolves, we'll give you additional data. There are also some logistical considerations associated with the new translation requirements, and these primarily concern the timing for the written agendas. As will be outlined in the next section, translation of the agenda for publication generally requires 3 business days. So it does require that staff have agenda language prepared and finalized just a little bit earlier than otherwise. So now let's look at the early agenda requirements, and we can go to the next slide. The Open Government Ordinance requires early agenda postings at each stage. So there are early posting for the preliminary agenda, early posting requirements for supporting documents, and early posting of the final agenda. And the ordinance does provide some relief from these early deadlines, but that relief is very limited, and we will look at that a little bit down the line. Next slide. The timing for the preliminary agenda. Previously, prior to the adoption of the Open Government Ordinance, the city clerk's practice was to post the council's preliminary agenda on Thursday, about a week and a half before the council meeting. This equaled generally about 12 calendar days before the meeting. The Open Government Ordinance now shifts the publication of the preliminary agenda back to 12 business days before the council meeting. And that essentially adds about another week, placing the publication at about 2.5 weeks before the council meeting. So we generally post, absent a holiday, generally that preliminary agenda will now be posted the Thursday, 2.5 weeks before the council meeting. We also note that the translation, I mentioned earlier, that translation service requires 3 additional business days to turn around the agendas. So the result is that the preliminary agenda language now must be finalized 15 business days, 3 full weeks prior to the council meeting. Next slide. Timing of supporting documents. The ordinance provides that supporting documents, and that includes the staff reports, the resolutions, ordinances, and the presentations. The ordinance states, quote, shall be added to the preliminary agenda as those supporting documents become available for publication. Staff, however, was concerned about the workload of a rolling production if we actually tried to do it as each document became available. we would be looking at likely republishing the agenda almost every day. And so we looked at some different options and finally settled on regular 2 publication dates. It's actually 3 if we count the final agenda. So first, all the agenda packets that are complete, that is what we call agenda ready, if those are ready at the time of the initial preliminary agenda publication, then they are included at that time. So in accordance with the ordinance, as we just talked about, that publication takes place 12 business days or 2.5 weeks before the council meeting. So as many documents as we have available, we add it to that early posting. Second, the preliminary agenda is republished on the following Thursday, a week and a half before the council meeting. It's equivalent to about 8 business days. And that is consistent. That posting, that second posting of the preliminary agenda is consistent with what we have been doing in the past. So that matches up well. And at that time, our goal is that all remaining agenda packets are attached at that time, so that all agenda packets will be posted that week and a half before the meeting, if not sooner. And then finally, the agenda, of course, packets are republished with the posting of the final agenda 4 business days before the council meeting. Next slide. We've touched on the posting of the final agenda. The final agenda is posted 4 business days before the council meeting. And once again, we need the 3 additional days for translation services. And the result is that the final agenda language must be finalized 7 business days, a week and a half, prior to the council meeting. I'll note that we do not translate all of the attachments, so those are going on a separate track. Those are, but the actual agenda language, both the preliminary and the final agenda language, are fully translated. Next slide. Now we can talk about implementation of those early postings. This new schedule has taken some time for us to adjust, but it is now fully implemented, as I mentioned. It was as of the February 9th council meeting. Preliminary agendas are published with any available attachments 12 business days prior to the council meeting. And then the preliminary agenda is republished no later than 8 business days prior to the council meeting with any additional attachments. The actual language of the preliminary agenda is not changed in that republication. It is simply republished as it was drafted earlier. Next slide. Also effective February 9th, the final agenda is being published no later than 4 business days before the meeting, and Gov delivery notices are sent to notify the public each time the agenda is published or republished, and in addition, anytime new documents are made available. Next slide. And let me go back for a moment. With respect to the final agenda, all the supporting documents are republished at that time. And if there are any subsequent revisions to those attachments, and you've seen that periodically with updated attachments, those are generally uploaded and published a day or so before the meeting. So what are the impacts that we're seeing? As I said, it's taking us all a little bit of time to adjust to the new schedule and to the new rhythm of agendas. And we're seeing a number of impacts. Some of the impacts, I think, are really simply a matter of us getting used to the changes, but other impacts are more substantive and significant. The first is workload. The preliminary agenda language now must be completed 3 full weeks before council meeting, as I mentioned earlier. And we have frequent republishing of the agenda. City clerk is faced with not just the 3 official publications, but also additional republications as documents get revised over the 3-week period. And you'll see an indication of that new workload on the next slide. We've also seen an increase in the number of Gov delivery notices that are sent out to subscribers. Again, those notices are sent with each publication and republication. So each time, each of the 3 agenda publications and any time new documents are added. And then finally, you'll note that the shift from calendar to business days, the final agenda due to that, the final agenda is published one day, generally on Wednesday before the agendas and before the meeting. And the preliminary agendas are published on a different day, generally on Thursdays. The final and preliminary agendas used to align and all be published on Thursdays. Now we have 2 separate days of publication. Next slide. So we've seen significant increase in the city clerk's workload. In January, as you see, the city clerk published or republished the agenda 7 times over the course of that month. That was a fairly typical month. And in the first half of March, as of March 11th, the city clerk published or republished the agenda 13 times. So if that pace keeps up, the month of March will require 26 publications with a corresponding increase in the number of staff hours required. So again, those March numbers are for only half of the month. Next slide. Now we have seen some general concerns. First and probably most important is that staff sees a reduction in our ability to respond nimbly to emergent issues, things such as societal events, the Atlantic shootings last week, such as the new county initiatives, for example, the eviction ordinance adopted now a month and a half ago. But we'll talk later about how we're addressing that and trying to increase our ability to respond to those emergent issues. We also have concerns about time-sensitive grant submittals, having to prepare materials early based on early estimates, and needing then subsequently to sometimes change those published documents. And then similarly, concerns about contracts. We want to move the contracts forward quickly, but negotiations may not yet be complete. And again, we need to adjust how we're doing that in order to allow that to go forward and not delay contracts or grant applications from coming to council. We have a couple of examples. So next slide. I mentioned the county's eviction protection ordinance. Our council's preliminary agenda was published on February 4th. The County Board of Supervisors then that following week adopted an urgency ordinance on February 9th and declared that that would be operative within the city absent alternative action by the council. Prior to the open government ordinance, we would have been able to put something on that week into our preliminary agenda, but because it had already been published, we were not able to do that. We did bring the report to council on February 23rd, 2 weeks later, but it did require the special findings to allow council consideration. Next slide. It's an example from the Public Works. Construction contracts under our provisions must be awarded within 60 days of bid opening. So we have very little room for delays in that 60-day period. We have little time to discuss funding in the event the bids come in over budget. We need to search out and find where the funding might come from. We have little leeway if a council meeting gets canceled or if a vote is delayed due to absences or abstentions. And so there is a significant risk that the city will not meet the contract award timelines. Again, we are working on ways to address those concerns. Next example. From our water department. Concerns about the timing of items that require both BPU approval and city council approval. Those timings are challenging. So at this point, we're looking at an option of either publishing the preliminary agenda with tentative language, anticipating what the Board of Public Utilities might do at their meeting, or we have the option to delay council consideration of the item. And sometimes that is really not feasible due to external deadlines, regulatory deadlines that the department has to work within. Next slide. The ordinance does include some relief valves of how we can address some of those concerns. First, with respect to items that are not on the preliminary agenda, this is an existing early agenda policy exception that an item that did not appear on the preliminary agenda may still be placed on the final agenda and heard by the council if the council, by an affirmative vote of 6 council members, finds good cause. And just a reminder, good cause is defined to be, quote, that as a result of exceptional circumstances beyond the control of the council, compliance with the 12 business day notice requirement would impose a substantial burden on the city's ability to conduct its business or result in prejudice to a private person. So that exception pre-existed the open government ordinance, and it remains in place. And this is what we use to hear the item on the county's eviction ordinance. The open government ordinance also includes a new exception for the 12-day posting requirement, and that exception is for appeals from a subordinate board, commissioner, committee that such appeals may be placed directly on the final agenda if that lower decision grants or denies a right, so somewhat limited. We've not yet had reason to utilize that exception, but is available. And I might also note one of the things that we've thought about is, would a similar exception be appropriate for items that require both, for example, a BPU approval and a council approval, or a planning commission approval and a council approval? Might those warrant a similar exception? Perhaps on the rationale that those items will have also had public noticing in front of the lower body as well. That is not, at this point though, it's only limited to items that grant or deny a right. Next slide. Now some of the relief valves for the final agenda. For items that do not appear on the final agenda but have reason to be considered by the council, we still rely on the exceptions that are contained in the Brown Act. So no new exceptions for items that are not on the final agenda. And those exceptions, again, are the majority of vote of the council that emergency poses a severe threat to public health or safety, or a 2/3 vote of the council that, quote, there's a need to take immediate action and that the need for action came to the attention of the city subsequent to the posting of the final agenda. And I'll just do a little side note here, query how this aligns with our own good cause exception for the preliminary agenda. Our own good cause exception requires a vote of 6 council members, and it requires a substantial burden on the city's ability to conduct its business or prejudice to a private person. So they don't quite align, but they are close. And then the final exception under the Brown Act is for certain continued items. Next slide. In the month and a half since we've begun implementation of the ordinance, we've used the relief valve, the exception, only once, and that again was for the report on the Sonoma County's eviction ordinance. But we've instead used some informal avenues to address concerns, including we've used more generalized language in some of our staff reports and resolutions to allow flexibility while still giving adequate notice and information to the public so that they're aware of what the item is about, but it gives us maybe more generalized language to make adjustments going forward. We've also included language to allow final documents to be adjusted after either after publication or after council action, subject to approval by the city attorney. And we've also provided for delegation of broader responsibilities to the city manager. So those are some of the ways that we've tried to adjust where needed to some of these early agenda deadlines. And we're still early in this process, and so staff will continue to work through these issues and try to find the best solutions. Next slide. So those were the two focuses: the implementation of the translation standards, and implementation of the early posting requirements. So now I'm just going to turn to a brief outline of some of the other ordinance provisions, and we'll walk through these pretty quickly. So next slide, agenda contents. The ordinance requires 4 items in the agenda. 2 were existing, 2 are new. Existing, a brief, meaningful description must be included as to the item, and that's been fully implemented under prior codes for years. Existing requirement that the recommended action be included in the agenda, again, fully implemented under prior codes. 2 new elements for the final agenda is to now include a description of budget impacts. That is still in process. Also, the agendas are to include a link to prior council actions when possible, and that also is in process. Next slide. A number of new requirements for management of council meetings. First is all meetings in council chambers will be broadcast, and that provision in the ordinance will include not just council meetings, but any meetings of any body, any of our city boards or commissions or committees that are held in the council chambers. Right now, everything is, all meetings are virtual, so that element has not yet been implemented. Second is to strive for time-certain scheduling of hearings. We have not yet begun to set time certains for public hearings, but we are looking at that. The third is to prioritize public hearings, to move them up in the calendar, in the agenda where possible. And that has been implemented informally by both Mayor Schwebhelm previously and Mayor Rogers currently. Next slide. Also for meeting management, the ordinance requires transparency as to agenda changes and continuances. This is to announce early and often as to if items are being continued or if items are being taken out of order. And again, the mayor has begun informal implementation of that requirement. Disclosures, the ordinance requires additional disclosures prior to and after closed session, and city attorney, we are informally implementing that at this point as well. And then finally, the public education, the development of the Citizens Guidebook, that is underway, and we do have a slide later to talk a little bit about that. Next slide. Meeting minutes. Speaker cards are to provide an opportunity for speakers to include a 1-sentence description of their comments, and that description can be used by the city clerk in preparing the minutes. That has been implemented. And then in terms of the timing of the minutes, council meeting minutes, that is in process. The requirement is that if no video is available, the draft minutes are to be available no later than 15 days after the meeting, and the final approved minutes are to be posted no later than 5 business days after approval. Next slide. Public records. The ordinance codifies many of our existing procedures and existing policies. So it requires that we designate the city clerk as a public records coordinator. That was implemented under prior policies. Each department is to designate a department representative. That was already implemented under prior policies. We are to provide staff training and public education, and that is ongoing. That has We have done that in the past, and we will continue to enhance that training and education. Next slide. Public records, the ordinance also sets forth time frames and procedures for response to public records requests. And those, again, it's codifying existing policies and laws, and those are already implemented. And then two new elements. We are to provide annual reporting of public records requests and the corresponding responses. And that will begin this calendar year 2021. And we are to have in place a complaint and appeal process for those individuals that feel that they did not get an appropriate response to their request. And that is in process also, and we'll have that in place by July 1. Next slide. Access to city data. The ordinance provides that all data generated by the city it should be available for public review unless that data is exempt from disclosure under the Public Records Act. That is reflective of existing law, and it has been implemented under prior codes. The new element is that all of the city data will be consolidated into a single web portal for ease of access. And that is going to be a little bit complicated, and that is in process. Next slide. The ordinance has educational elements, and that is the most significant element is the preparation of the Citizens Guidebook. That is in process, and that will include descriptions of the city government structure and organization, description of the city government responsibilities and functions. It will provide a dictionary of local government terms and definitions, and it will describe how citizens can get involved, how they can participate, what are all the opportunities for access and the public to get involved. And the ordinance also calls for ongoing training and education. And of course, that will also is in the works. And we can also ask Magali if she has additional elements that she would like to talk about as to the Citizens Guidebook. Next slide. Enforcement of the ordinance. The ordinance also sets forth a series of requirements for its enforcement. That is underway. We do not have yet those forms or procedures in place, but they will be in place by July 1. And those will include that the complaint must be filed within 30 business days of the violation. There will be a hearing before the city manager within 90 days of the receipt of the complaint. And then that the city manager will issue his decision within 30 business days of the hearing. And finally, that we will provide an annual report to the council and to the public of any complaints and the dispositions of those complaints. Next slide. And that is it. And I would like to offer both Stephanie Williams, City Clerk, and Magali Tejas as Director of Community Engagement, if they have anything they would like to add or expand upon from the presentation.
Yes, good afternoon. If I could just add in terms of the Citizens Guidebook, we're very excited. We finalized our contract with Engagement HQ, so we're looking at different ways aside, so just enhancing the Citizens Guidebook and having different modalities. So we'll be able to have surveys, quizzes, videos, different ways that community could engage with the city in terms of the information that we'll be sharing and the different education that will be happening. So happy to continue reporting out on that, or if there are any specific questions.
And then I would like to add that we are finalizing the hiring of a limited term position in the city clerk's office to help relieve some of the burden that we have, not only with the agenda, but really specifically with our public records requests. We are at over 350 for 2021. And we reached about 1,000 in 2020. So that is a huge workload for one person who's currently doing it. So I am completing that hire, and that new person should be starting very, very shortly.
And if I may follow up just briefly on that, yes, the public records system, it has a tremendous workload associated with it, and many complications working across the city with all of the different departments, working on reviewing documents for privilege, for privacy issues. It is a very complicated process, and I am very happy to have that City Clerk's office will have additional assistance with that. So, and I will also note that in terms of the concerns that I described a little bit today, we did ask for input from the departments. So that is information that we have received from the different departments. And again, it has been a challenge to adjust to some of these, particularly the earlier deadlines, but we are trying to work through it all. And we do appreciate this interim period for implementation.
All right, thanks, Sue. We'll go ahead. We'll start with some questions from council members. I see Councilmember Tibbetts with his hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my first question would be for Stephanie. It was obviously pretty concerning to see that your workload under the new provisions of the agenda almost doubled. I think you went from 13 to 20 hours. And now that's leading to the hiring of a limited time position. I guess my question is, so this limited time position, it can't be blended. Well, let me step back and ask a different question. Under the PRA requests we got in 2020, that was 1,000. Those weren't related to the ordinance. I'm assuming that was just, we're becoming a bigger city. We have a lot going on, and people are aware of their right to request a Public Record Act findings. So are we need that position no matter what, it sounds like, unrelated to this ordinance, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Then could this position be somehow blended with the limited time position that you're seeking, or do those explicitly need to be separated?
Well, the position that I am finalizing now is to help with the public records request, and the hope is that by bringing on this additional person, this will free up some time for both persons to then help with either boards and commissions or agenda management. Because right now our public records request is handled by one admin tech working with all of the departments. And so by bringing on the second person, I'm hoping to alleviate that burden so that there's opportunity for both employees to work on other projects in the city clerk's office.
Thank you. So if I could ask this, and I'm sorry to be putting you on the spot, but I said this during the last meeting when we first discussed this. I just think it's really important to glean staff's perspective, because we're not the ones who are going to live with any consequences of this decision. So I hope that staff feels that this is a safe space to kind of really talk collaboratively and constructively about how to make the best ordinance. I think the council's committed to it, but really trying to figure out what works well for you. So would these positions still be needed, in your opinion, within your department, even if we didn't have the Open Government Task Force? So what I'm driving at is, does the addition of the task force require the second hire, or does your department, even if we didn't have the task force and the ordinance at all, would we be still hiring these folks? I'm trying to really draw a clear line between what's the additional impact of the ordinance and what is not.
Right. Yes, we would, because the city is growing. The records request doubled from one year to the next, and as our city has grown and transparency has become a big issue for cities and a goal and objective for councils across the state. We're finding not only in our city, but other cities that requests are coming in more frequently because the public is learning that they have the right to request records. And so that is the trend that we're seeing in city clerk's office across the state.
Okay, thanks. And then I have a question for, I saw the department feedback. It was a little concerning on the addition of 3 extra business days to the timeline. Could somebody from PED share any impacts that they've been experiencing, as well as somebody from Public Works, just to kind of share? Was there, for example, any incidents or specific cases where you realized, oh, wow, this is really encumbering us, and here's how it slowed us down, or here's how we got around it? Just trying to get a feel for how some pretty key departments adjusted. The big concern to me in this report was obviously grants and our ability to quickly respond to those opportunities to bring in revenue from outside the tax base.
So I am going to ask Jason not to address that. We will have to follow up with interim city manager Claire Hartman, because she's out this week, but we will get you some feedback on that route. But I will turn it over to Jason to field the Public Works side of this question.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, City Manager McGlynn. Councilmember Tibbetts, Mayor and council members, thank you for the question. I will just let you know that the additional time has created a challenge to some extent, as we're looking at anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks of lead time needing to be able to get something on the council agenda. Has it directly impacted a grant process at this point? No, we haven't actually had any particular or specific impact, but historically, especially with grants and requests coming from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, we receive less than 2 to 3 weeks to be able to respond to those. It's in those instances that we're going to end up running into problems with this particular ordinance. We just haven't had that specific instance occur during the last 3 months as we've been testing this out. So from our experience at this point, the only challenge is trying to look 6 weeks out in order to get our items on the council agenda. But we do anticipate, as we start to get back into more normal business, the rest of the state isn't seeing the timelines the same way our organization does. And this is where that's going to provide or result in the most challenging impacts.
And if I may just follow up quickly on, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much for the question and for the response. And Jason made a good point, is that the deadlines that I walked through in the PowerPoint, those are the publication deadlines. And we're not set up that everyone could turn in everything that day and get it published. There is several weeks in advance of that to get through our own internal agenda review process and through all the different departments. Each item goes through, it goes from a department and it goes all the way through. It goes through a secret review, it goes through finance, it goes through our office, and several others. So it is again, I'm very glad that Assistant City Manager Nutt pointed that out, that those, we have to have everything ready, as he said, 3 to 6 weeks in advance of all of that. So,
and I would just add to Assistant City Manager and the city attorney's point. One of the challenges we're having right now is actually evaluating this, because there's so many issues coming at us very, very quickly. And even scheduling simple conversations is getting really, really challenging because of the amount of lead time. And I think initially we thought that maybe we could publish things, but it's actually becomes more confusing if we publish things that aren't ready, because then we have to go behind that and have a conversation. So I will say, you're beginning to see some of the struggles with this approach. It's still really early. I can't say that it's not something we can't work out, but I will say what I'm hearing from staff is a lot of struggle, a lot of revision, and a lot of challenge trying to figure out just simply when we have to have something. And so I will say, it's probably one of those things that we're coming back to have a deeper conversation about what we need resource-wise to manage this conversation, because we are struggling. We are struggling right now with this.
And I would just want to echo what the city manager said in terms of coming back to you for another conversation as we have more experience. We're really only a month and a half into this, so we don't have that full, the full impact of full experience and the full ability of staff to start getting used to this whole process and the earlier deadlines and how we best respond. So I would ask for that as well.
So
yeah,
our request may be to give us more time to really work on this, and because it's hard for us to figure out what's a process issue that we need to straighten out and we'll get better over time, and what's a response. I would say we're all seeing July 1 loom really, really heavy on us, and not to not be able to provide you a satisfactory answer. And I'm feeling the anxiety within the organization about that.
Well, I appreciate all that honest feedback. You know, one of the things that came to my mind, Jason, was, well, in the scenario of the grant, we do have the ability to post this to council and get 6 votes and bring it forward. But procedurally, would your staff then, for example, plan that would be the outcome? I mean, would you start generating a grant with the expectation that would be the process?
So to be quite frank, we would do one of two things. We would either go ahead and anticipate and then try to get to council before the deadline, or quite frankly, we'll just simply make the submittal. It's easier sometimes to pull things off of a regional calendar than to try to do things retroactively. So our goal would be to try to crystal ball as much as we can to be able to get to council before the regional deadline. But we do have to anticipate, and I'll just say this. When it comes to some of the things that MTC has put forward, that's not even an option. We don't even learn of a specific deadline until we have a 2-week time to turn it around. And so the way some of those things come forward, there's really not an opportunity for us to even get on a council agenda, even with I mean, we would require a majority vote or the 2/3 vote in order to get on an agenda at the last minute, and to be able to make the findings that it's critical could be challenging to do. And so while we would ask for it, it's just one of those. It would end up being an exception that we might have to do more often than we would like.
Well, it's interesting to me because in what you just said, and I would support that, Jason. If you guys just submitted a grant without bringing it to the council's attention because it was an opportunity to get money to support the community, I would wholeheartedly support that. But in that pursuit, we have now made something that was originally transparent unavailable to the public. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind with this process. And as we work through it, maybe grants are something that we want to exempt from this ordinance as well. Just because the public needs to know about grants we're submitting for, so they can organize their community and anticipate, how they want to influence it being spent on their streets, their parks, or whatever the grant is for, their transportation. I guess the last thing I will say is, just my general thoughts. I'm with staff. I'm very happy with this ordinance. I am so thrilled, I got to tell you, to see an agenda with a Spanish translation finally. And my hat is off to the mayor and his task force for making just that very thing happen and a lot of this other stuff. But I'm leaning towards, personally, and I want to see this through to July 1st, definitely, and for better understand it. But I'm leaning towards, okay, we're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, a difference of 3 business days. So we're going from 9 to 12, but it sounds like there's really big financial ramifications on the side of grants, on the side of some impacts to the clerk's time. And we're not even in election season when her office will be really impacted. So, but my really sincere thanks to people for trying to make this work, because it's a cause, I think, and it's something worth trying to do.
All right, Councilmember Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of my comments and questions are really in line with Mr. Tibbetts. This has been the one issue. As supportive as I am, and having been in the beginnings of these conversations, our ability to be nimble has been the one concerning piece. And I'll just say out front that if staff needs some extra time, I would be one that would be looking to give them the ability to do some further analysis and some further research into where we might be able to give that flexibility that could be very important to certain departments to get those very funds that Mr. Tibbetts was talking about. But I do need, Madam City Attorney, could you reread the good cause definition for me again?
Certainly, and of course, I don't have it fully memorized yet.
Of course. I would hope not.
I'll be. So, good cause is defined, and this is the good cause to hear something that is not on the preliminary agenda, but is on the final agenda.
Right.
And it's that it's the finding that as a result of exceptional circumstances beyond the control of the council, compliance with the 12 business day notice requirement would impose a substantial burden on the city's ability to conduct its business or result in prejudice to a private person.
Okay, so, and I don't mean to be confusing here, but this ordinance is within the control of the council. So if we are creating a situation that is that we control, that we put into place, and then we decide to exempt ourselves from it, is it in control of the council, or this is not state law? And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, what the city council in Santa Rosa is doing is rather unique in the state. If I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure how many other municipalities have these stricter requirements. So there are positives and negatives to this, of course. But I'm wondering if we start using that exception too often, will it lose its effect, and will the community begin to will they question us and basically say, you're using this all the time, so you're defeating what your intent was? That's a concern of mine. It's the crying wolf issue, and are we indeed kind of creating a situation that puts us into jeopardy of being accused of just ignoring our own rules if we keep coming up with exceptions? Now, admittedly, you did say that it's only been used once in February, I believe. That was during that month. But as the future, we don't know what the future holds. And if we start using it all the time, that would give me some concern. So I think, and that's in part why I think if the staff needs more time to look at the challenges of this particular piece of the ordinance, then I would be in favor of giving them that time, as opposed to using this exception over and over and over again when it becomes kind of meaningless over time. So that would be my concern. And I thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to just clarify, two things. One, I want to clarify that, yes, it's our ordinance that has this exception, but the exception is in our settlement agreement with Sierra Club from the late 80s, early 90s. I forget the exact date. And so, but the settlement agreement related to a 9 calendar day posting requirement. And so if we didn't meet that 9-day posting requirement, which is like the Sunday, a week and a half, a week before the council meeting. And so we were posting it. Our practice was to post the agenda on the Thursday, a week and a half before. If we were missing that deadline, that's what's required by our settlement agreement. But because we've now moved that Thursday, week and a half, to Thursday, 2.5 weeks, that's where you would have flexibility in changing the exception. I don't know if that's clear. That's a little bit confusing, but it's because we've moved the publication of the preliminary agenda a week back. That's where your flexibility is. That language, as I mentioned, we did an exception for appeals that are coming up generally from the Planning Commission, and we are allowing those to go straight onto the final agenda. And the council, in making that decision, found that those delay of those appeals would always result in the prejudice to a private person. And so it was based on that finding. So if we were going to carve out any additional exceptions, we're going to have to be able to make some finding that keeps it within the terms of the Sierra Club settlement agreement.
Right. Thank you for that, because I had forgotten about that settlement. You know, it pops up, and I forgot that forced us into a certain practice which had seemed workable, and we got used to it. I think we got used to it. So anyway, I'm good. Thank you very much for that clarification.
All right, thanks, Councilmember. Councilmember Alvarez.
Thank you, Mayor. For myself, I just want to echo the statement that was made a little bit earlier, where we are here to support our staff. So with that being said, I want our staff to know that they do have my support, and I will be leaning on them for direction on their needs. It would be disingenuous for me to say that I know what you're going through, as I do not, but I hope that you will express and further express the needs from our staff so we can complement your efforts. And I do appreciate you for those efforts, especially for a Spanish-speaking community, as I see every day how important it is for us to be involved and educated, so we know what's coming down the pike and why it's important for us to be involved. So I thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Fleming.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you to staff for this presentation. I have a clarifying question for Assistant City Manager Nutt around the 2 weeks that sometimes are required to turn things around, in particular MTC grants and so forth. When you say that, it makes me wonder, there's times when we don't have a council meeting for 2 weeks, and that would happen anyway. What do you do in those circumstances?
So we generally hope that we're going to align with some council meeting coming up. I will say our biggest argument is that MTC asks for some very short turnarounds that most agencies struggle with. In many of those cases, they relate to transit issues, where a majority of the transit operations within the region are actually managed by an executive or a general manager, and not necessarily a board that requires that's required to take action. And so many of the larger transit agencies have a different level of authority that they're able to turn things around in a much quicker fashion. With the type of system that we have, we're beholden to city policy. And in that regard, some of those become very difficult. And we do periodically have to do the best we can with the information that we've got. We have been lucky that I think only once in the last 6 years have we had to ask for forgiveness for taking action, which we took we did the best that we could to take council into consideration, and we felt it was reasonable to take that action. But every other time we've been able to get on the council agenda at the very last minute to be able to make things happen. It is getting tougher and tougher, but we continue to try to ask MTC to be more cognizant of city rules as opposed to some of the transit agencies that can move things quicker. And so far in the last year, we haven't seen the very tight turnarounds that we had a couple of years prior.
Thank you for that information. I see this whole endeavor as trying to balance two really admirable goals. The first is transparency in the people's government, and the second is financial responsibility and the ability of staff to get things done in a timely manner. And neither, getting funds back home nor public transparency, neither one trumps the other in my mind. It has to be a balance here. between the two because both goals are essential to the functioning of our government. And so I tend to side with, let's continue to see how it goes. Let's continue to upstaff the city clerk's office. Let's make the plans with the BPU and the planning commission and whatever other boards might have matters coming forward so that we can get things turned around quickly. And then let's look at how we want to address grants as that goes forward so that we can try to achieve transparency and fiduciary responsibility simultaneously with an understanding that we can't do things perfectly because we're dealing with other governments, we're dealing with other agencies. And, this is kind of the epitome of why things go slowly in government is because of this balance between these competing interests, wherein we try to be responsible, but the responsibility is sort of it's a catch-22. So I want to thank staff. I want to thank Stephanie and your office in particular, as well as other departments that are working so hard to get things done. And I do agree with Councilmember Sawyer in that the Sierra Club decision probably did take some time to get used to, and that this is an expansion on that settlement agreement. So perhaps in some time we will get a little bit more used to it, and also in time we'll understand the particulars of where we need to make adjustments. And I'm all for us making those adjustments as necessary, so long as we maintain the spirit of why we're doing what we're doing here. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember. I do have a couple of additional questions, and one is a clarification, Sue. You had mentioned that the only time that we've used the exception was for the county's eviction defense or the eviction ordinance. I just wanted to clarify because it made it seem like we used the exception, but it still took 2 weeks for us to get it on the agenda. But the actual reason that there was 2 weeks between when the county acted and when we acted is we didn't have a council meeting in the prior week, right? Our council meeting on the 17th was canceled, or 16th was canceled, and then we had goal setting. And so we didn't add it to goal setting, so we brought it back at our next available council meeting. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I clarified that because I didn't want to leave the public with the perception that this had been delayed an additional week because of the ordinance.
Right. It's just that we had to get it. You're right. We could have gotten it on a final agenda. I'd have to look at the calendar as to how that works, but yes, we could have gotten it on the agenda for, it still would have been, well, anyway, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that that was put out there. I did have a question about, it seems to be that for me, and maybe I just missed this when we were first discussing the ordinance when we passed it, but the biggest change seems to be not the additional day that we've requested for items to be available, but actually the additional 3 days on top of that for the Spanish translation. That seems to be the biggest variable that I don't think we discussed much. So my question is sort of, is there a way for us to reduce that 3-day timeline that we need for items to be translated? I mean, going the direction that we're going in terms of better communication with the community, is this a position we might want to consider pulling in-house that could potentially turn around the agenda faster than 3 days?
We can look at any of those options, Mayor. I think, there's going to be a considerable escalation in cost because I don't think it can fall to one individual. It would have to be multiple individuals to provide the associated backup, but absolutely we can look at any of those questions. We don't have an answer to that today, but absolutely can look at that.
Yeah, I'd be interested in more of that information later, not just in regards to the agenda, but some of the other requirements that we have and some of the other, quite frankly, direction that the council wants to go on things such as Spanish translation during meetings or documents potentially being translated. That might be an avenue to explore to help reduce that timeline while still providing the same intent and getting an overall better outcome for the community. So I'd be interested in more on that. The other question that I had was for Stephanie. with the public records requests that you're seeing, and I appreciated hearing Councilmember Tibbetts' questions around how much of this is related to the ordinance versus changes that we've seen. Part of the ordinance helps build in the infrastructure to make it so that these requests that you get that are consistent are also then publicly available through the open data portal. And I just want to get your take on if you see that as a net positive. Yes, an increase in workload now, but once that infrastructure is in place, do you think that that will help long-term in terms of being able to point the public to where the data is already available instead of having to recreate it every time?
Certainly, if we have documents on our website and can point the public to it, then that will make it easier for the public to access their documents that they want. We would still need to administer it as far as logging the record, even with pointing them to that portal. And we're still bound by the Public Records Act to respond within the days that we are required to respond. But yes, if frequently asked documents are on a portal or somewhere where they can go, that will make responding easier. I don't know that it would diminish the number of requests that we receive.
And I do want to clarify that the data portal is for city data, not for city documents. And I know we discussed that several times at the subcommittee of the original proposal was to have all city documents available through this portal. And the reality is that's what, tens of thousands of documents. So we narrowed, the subcommittee did, and then the council did keep it to that the data portal is for data that's generated by the city, not for documents. That being said, our new Public Records Act software does allow people to see what other requests have been made and to then look at the documents that were provided in response. And I don't know, I don't know from Stephanie how often, it's hard to tell how many people have avoided submitting their own requests by going onto that system and doing a search. I don't have that information. So.
I don't think there's a way to track that. If somebody goes to our website, where they're going, and if they're looking at that next request portal data, that system that we use to manage our public records request.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I guess this goes sort of in line with the question around translation. I'll be interested long-term in hearing from you if having that temporary position to help get the infrastructure built would be worth the upfront investment for the time savings that you could potentially see long-term from having that, call it a database, whatever the new systems implementation looks like. I think that that'd be a good conversation for us to continue to have as well.
So again, I think you're hearing that staff is ready, willing, and able to engage and try to find solutions. The city manager is just very concerned about the bandwidth within the organization to do this type of work, right? And we're fast coming up on July 1, and we still have to have conversations about what the city's going to do vis-a-vis its rescue dollars, other opportunities that are out there. And so it's not a lack of willingness to try to understand, as Councilmember Fleming suggested, where is that space between and Councilmember Sawyer, adapting to a new model, and what do we need to do that? I think there's a lot of willingness to do that. I think we're concerned about being able to meet those expectations by July 1. And so when we come back, we may be asking for some more runway to actually help do the things that we're talking about.
No, thank you for that. I will also acknowledge that, you know, we're trying to figure out what the most good is. And I've heard consistently the concern around grants. I'm happy to take that back to the Open Government Committee and talk about whether we want to make an amendment there or an exception there. I also think resolutions is one, and I'll bring that up actually later in our meeting tonight. I will go to public comment on this, and then I'll bring it back to council. And I think what would be helpful for me in particular to hear from council members and comments is areas where you would like the Open Government Committee to explore further, or different approaches to get to the current outcomes that we have, if you can be creative or if you have things that you want us to explore and work with staff on. But first, I'll go to public comment. So if there's anybody who would like to speak on this item, go ahead and hit the raise hand feature. All right, and Stephanie, I'm not seeing anybody raise their hand. Did we have any voicemail public comments on this item?
Yes, we did. Coming right up.
Item 3.1, study session, open government. Do we want to have open government? Although some of the older members of the city council may not be in agreement with that type of activity. The only way we'll get truly open government with authentic community engagement in our governmental process is if you folks begin to make the opportunities for the public to participate in these discussions open to the public again. Open up our government. You've closed it down for a year. You've used this exclusive Zoom type approach, which keeps people out. You should open up City Hall, let people come in at certain specific times for certain items and participate on Zoom there, if that's the only way you'll do it. But keeping people out because they don't have access to the internet is totally wrong. It's not open government, it's exclusion. That's what's occurring. So please stop that and open our government back up to people who are maybe more disadvantaged than the well-to-do who have all the internet connections. Thank you for your time.
Mayor, that concludes voice message public comments received for item 3.1.
Great, thank you so much, Dina. So I'll bring it back to council. As I mentioned, I think what would be really helpful for me is to hear from council members which additional areas you'd like the Open Government Committee to explore, or what additional information you might need to hear from staff before full implementation of this ordinance going forward. So who wants to start? Let's go with Councilmember Alvarez.
More of a question, actually. What are the implications for allowing staff other than 7 point on our agenda to make their concerns known to the council? Is it possible for in item 10.0 under other, or is this a violation of our Brown Act?
I'm not sure I understand in terms of when, are you asking when might?
Yes, for example, so if staff noticed that they had an issue in regards to grants, bids, or a contract award, would they be able to disclose the need for our attention under a section on our agenda, or would this not be ample notification to the public, which would be the Brown Act violation?
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
We would be bringing those. I mean, I'll let the city attorney address the particulars, but just council member, we'd be bringing those concerns back to the subcommittee as we move forward, and back to the council as part of the report out. That's the structure in place. And so staff's concerns are being brought forward. You're hearing some of them. There will be more as we learn more. And there will be Claire will be following up on some of the concerns that are generated out of PDE shortly. So there's going to be ample opportunity for that feedback, just structurally in the conversation.
And I would just respond also that to the extent your question is about concerns leading up to full implementation on July 1st, the city manager is exactly correct. And beyond July 1st as well, those can go to the subcommittee and then be brought up. To the extent that your question was with respect to ongoing, if there's a grant that's coming up and we don't have time, is there some other way other than a regular agenda item? And the answer to that is really no. It needs to be on the agenda in one of there's a report or a consent item, and that would need to be posted in accordance with the ordinance or subject to a specific exemption.
Thank you both.
All right, Councilmember Sweathelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I just want to thank everyone who's been involved in this project. I know Mr. Suri and I are prior to being sworn in back in December of 2014. We heard the first Open Government Task Force report to that council, and we've been working on it ever since. It's kind of crazy once you start looking what has occurred to the city of Santa Rosa since December of 2014, you understand why we got it here. And just the number of people who are in different roles when back in 2014 or even not with the city are now currently working on it. So I really appreciate everyone staying through with this. One of the things for me, and it's been mentioned several times here, I appreciate the mayor keeping the task force open. And I would ask that is the venue. That's, in my opinion, why we have a subcommittee. So all this can go deeper dive than we do here with the city council. And also my request would be that those that are still interested, who had been on that Open Government Task Force, the original one, because I know a lot of those folks are still there, please involve them in the process because they did that real deep dive. They've explored much of what we have discussed at a deeper level, made the recommendations. Some we accepted, some we didn't. So I would just ask that they, if they so choose, to continue to be involved with that. But I appreciate what the process is. The other thing that I think is a priority, and Magali talked a little bit about it, the residents guidebook, because I really see this as a shared responsibility. It's really easy for some members of the community to point fingers at us saying you're not being transparent. Well, what's that mean? And all of us have handled those type of conversations that so much information is offered by the city on either a website or a data portal. So I think that education aspect is going to be huge. I really look forward to seeing that product in the near future.
Thanks, Councilmember. Councilmember Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. And I agree with Councilmember Schwedhelm about involving or getting input of those that are willing to offer it from the original task force, because they did an enormous amount of work with the community and also the task force themselves. I appreciate the work, Mayor, that you have done in helping to receive public input as we continued that process of receiving input from the community, and your dedication to this endeavor. So as far as giving you what you're looking for today, I appreciate Councilmember Fleming's bringing this back to balance, and it really is. It is an issue of balance, and I'm trying to balance open government with frozen government, and how to get the job done. I'm looking. So I would be suggesting. I believe we can always get more public input, but I would be at this point. I am looking for those areas of greatest concern by the staff in being able to satisfy the intention and the spirit of the results or the changes to how we conduct business, and that they give us a bullet points on those issues that continue to be, or they are concerned that they are sticking points as we have made more stringent or changes that were more stringent in our reporting or in our preparation for our meetings. So I know we've received a lot of from the community, and we've had some cautions from staff as well, and we're receiving some today. But those are really the issues: is what is the biggest impact on staff, and to bring those back to us and see if there's some relief that we can give them, or delay, for instance, for them if necessary. It was mentioned by the city manager that July is sounding very close, and indeed, given how long our agendas can be and the issues that we are challenged by currently, that giving them a bit of extra time may be a prudent move. July, back when we put the timeline together, seemed like a long way away, and it isn't so far down the road now. So I would be looking for staff input and the potential for a delay in certain parts of the implementation, because we've already started doing part of it. So we may be able to do more, but there may be some that are the sticking points that we want to throw back to the task force or the subcommittee and let us chew on it some more, or let those that are involved chew on it some more and see if we can come up with some changes. And indeed, there may be a couple of issues that we can't find our way around and that we might have to compromise potentially on the product that has been presented so far. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Tibbetts?
Thanks, Mayor. I got just right off the bat, I am supportive of everything in this ordinance. The only thing that I carve out as an exception, because I'm still watching it, is the timepiece to the agenda. I really can't express how glad and grateful I am that we now have Spanish translation services. I think that Chris, you're right about the portal concept. I don't know what the technicalities are of having servers that size and information storing and uploading, but I hope that the public will try to utilize that portal before immediately leaping into a Public Records Act request process. And I think it has the potential to be that. So I'm super supportive of the public having access to that information as well. The only reason why I get hung up on the agenda timeline process is because it's not as if we don't post. It's not even as if we do the state mandated minimum. We're doing 9 calendar days, which to the best of my knowledge is already ahead of the county and most, if not all, other cities. Again, I could be wrong, but I think we're doing a good job there. And I haven't really had anybody yet tell me why we need the extra week. It feels like it's one of those things where it's just an area that we can be better. And that's a good reason to be better, but not if it comes at the expense of freezing or tying the hands of a lot of our staff and their ability to be nimble. Because 4 years ago, 5 years ago, this city hall was known for being anything but nimble. We had that culture problem where it was taking too much time to get any policies done or permits out of planning and things done at Public Works. And through the efforts of the 2 previous councils and hopefully this council has been to undo that. And certainly the efforts of the city manager and staff to change that culture, to create a nimble and responsive government. And if staff comes back to me and says, this extra week that we're imposing on ourselves is really restricting our ability to do that, I won't be there to support it. But I am looking forward to hearing from a lot of the people who brought this proposal forward, because I'm sure there was a reason for it. Particularly, Karen Weeks and members of that original task force and Pat Cuda and Santa Rosa together. So admittedly, I need to go out and reach out to those folks and find out, okay, what was the reason for the extra week? But that's what I'm thinking, Mayor. And again, I do want to thank you and the previous councils that did bring this forward, because I think there's a lot to be celebrated in it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know that this does pose a challenge for our council as well as our staff in executing. However, I do believe that the spirit of it is something that we ought to be really proud of. To take something from 2014 all the way to 2021 with all of the challenges that we've experienced in the city of Santa Rosa, with both of our, all of the councils since then and staff members since then, working so hard to get to yes. I believe that this is something that really demonstrates our leadership in the North Bay and even beyond. And so while there are challenges with staff bandwidth and with the execution of this, I do trust that the subcommittee will address the policy challenges and that staff will communicate those, and we will take them on and figure out reasonable solutions to those problems. And as far as the issue of bandwidth goes, what I do recall us saying when we first set this in motion in our last meeting, it's been in motion quite a while, but is that, or I recall personally saying, tell us what you need. Instead of saying there's not enough bandwidth, give us a reasonable estimate of what you need. Now, it's hard to predict what you need before you try something. So you're part of the way through trying something and telling us you need more in city clerk's office. Great. I want to give you whatever you need to meet the requirements and the needs of the people that essentially that compose this government. And so we are here to serve what our constituents want. And I think that this is taking great strides to doing so. And I'm really, really proud of the work that you are doing. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Councilmember. I did want to highlight one of the things that Stephanie mentioned, and that's that part of the increase in the PRAs that we're seeing is a broader understanding from the public of what information they are entitled to. And to me, that is the spirit of community engagement that we're trying to foster at this city. Is yes, it's going to take additional resources, but community engagement isn't a one-time thing. And I think that just like those PRAs in California's system, the access to information that we're trying to provide to people, I think people will start to recognize and rely on and start to utilize a little bit more, and that will help us with a more informed community. And I'll tell you, just since this passed, there have been numerous times where I've been talking to folks in public who disagreed with decisions that the council had made, where they said, well, you guys just tried to ram this by us without anybody knowing that it was happening. And I got to say, not true. We actually have one of the longest lead times out of any city that I've talked to across the nation, and more opportunities for community engagement and for you to participate than anywhere else. And it's been a significant learning opportunity and quite frankly, a big feather in the hat for the city to be so willing to take in that public input and to work with folks. It'll take time, but I think that it is a step overall in the right direction. What I'll do is I'll take the information that I'm hearing here from council members, the questions, the concerns, go back and work with staff in the subcommittee, with the vice mayor as well as Councilmember Alvarez, and hopefully by full implementation, we can either have sorted out some of these issues to address them adequately so that staff are happy and that it meets the intent, or at that point, we can continue to have a conversation about the trade-offs and see if there's a different direction or different language we'd like in some of those ordinances. Mr. City Manager, the City Attorney, and Ms. City Clerk, are there any additional questions or comments coming out of the study session? I'm seeing shaking heads. So council, we'll take a quick 10-minute break and we'll come back at 4:15 for the rest of our meeting tonight. All right, Madam City Clerk, let's go ahead and resume our meeting. We'll call it back to order and do a roll call vote, please. Or a roll call, please.
Thank you. Councilmember Tibbetts. Councilmember Schwedhelm.
Here.
Councilmember Sawyer.
Here.
Councilmember Fleming.
Here.
Councilmember Alvarez.
Present.
Vice Mayor Rogers.
Present.
Mayor Rogers.
Here.
Councilmember Tibbetts, have you joined us? Okay, let the record show that all council members are present with the exception of Councilmember Tibbetts.
Great, thank you so much. So as was mentioned earlier in today's meeting, we do have interpreter services being provided in Spanish. Madam Zoom host, Dina, can you please walk through one more time how folks can access the Spanish channel?
Thank you, Mayor, will do. First of all, I'd like to ask the interpreter not currently interpreting on the Spanish channel to raise your hand so I can bring you back over to the panelist side to translate. Thank you. Live translation can be heard on a Spanish channel, and you can join the Spanish channel by clicking on the interpretation icon on your Zoom toolbar. It looks like a globe. Once you join the Spanish channel, we recommend you shut off the main audio so you can clearly hear the Spanish translation. Charles, would you mind?
Sí, la interpretación en español está disponible. Las personas quienes deseen escuchar en español pueden pasar al canal de español. Para cambiar de canal, haga clic en el icono de interpretación ubicado en la barra de herramientas de Zoom. Parece un globo terráqueo. Ya que se une al canal de español, recomendamos que apaguen su micrófono para poder escuchar la interpretación claramente.
Thank you, Charles. Mayor, back to you.
Great, thank you so much, Dina. So Council, we did not have any closed session. We have no proclamations or presentations. We also have no staff briefings this evening. So let's go ahead to City Manager and City Attorney reports. Sean and Sue, who wants to start?
I have nothing to report.
And I also have nothing to report this evening.
Perfect. We'll go on to item number 9. Council members, are there any statements of abstention? Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be abstaining from 11.1 due to the fact that I was absent for that meeting.
Okay, we'll make sure we keep that down. Is there anybody else? All right, we'll go on to our mayors and council members reports. Item 10. Who wants to start? Councilmember Alvarez.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I respectfully ask that today's meeting adjournment be dedicated to Danny Rizzo, who passed away recently due to COVID-19. Danny, a leader in our community, someone who I'm very thankful for throughout my life, and specifically even running for city council. One of the people that blessed me with their signatures on that piece of paper that allowed me to be a candidate. And for the amount of kids in South Park and beyond who have benefited from the goodness of his heart. And I would hope that we can dedicate the adjournment to him and his family who continues to fight.
Absolutely, Councilmember Alvarez. I'll be happy to adjourn tonight's meeting in his memory. Do we have any other council member reports? All right, Council, I do have one item that I want to bring to your attention. We've had 2 different incidents throughout our community and throughout our nation over the last week since our last council meeting. The first was an incident with the vice mayor in Roanoke Park who received threatening and racist calls related to a vote that she took on the Roanoke Park City Council. I just want to report back to the council that I joined with the other mayors and the chairwoman of the Board of Supervisors in writing a letter of support for Vice Mayor Elward. down in Roanoke Park, as well as expressing our condemnation for any racist attacks against anybody within our community. Subsequent to that, we also saw a spike in hate crimes related to our AAPI community, and it was requested that the city pass a resolution in solidarity condemning those hate crimes and standing with our AAPI community. This is one of those areas that we had sort of talked about with the Open Government Task Force report. In order to get a resolution on the agenda, this is why I brought that up as a possible amendment that we might want to make. We would have had to have made findings about the urgent nature of the resolution. What I chose to do with the council, I hope's blessing, is instead turn it into a letter to the public, to our AAPI community, a letter from the mayor's desk that is attached to the agenda for you to review. And I wanted to bring it to council members to see if there was interest in adding a resolution, a formal resolution to our next agenda that basically has the same sentiment of standing in solidarity with our AAPI community and condemning any speech or actions against minority communities within Santa Rosa and more broadly.
It certainly supports the motion. Tom, go ahead.
I'm supportive of that, Mayor Rogers. I think it's a great idea.
Second.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm seeing all thumbs up for that idea. So we'll go ahead. The resolution was actually prepared. We were trying to figure out how to bring it. So we'll add that to our next meeting agenda for approval. And then in the meantime, I will point you to the letter that's in written communications at the end of tonight's agenda to see sort of what we have already put out there publicly to our community as well. And I will say that this is in compliance with our support that we have provided for our community over the last 4 years, starting with our indivisible community ordinance. Councilmember Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. This would be a good exception. I think that because things can happen very quickly that deserve need our attention. And even though this is probably in a sense kind of on the lighter side of that particular exception, because it's a letter, but the impact is important and vital. And I think that we need to add that into that bullet list of things to exempt whenever necessary without having to jump through too many hoops to do it.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to bring it to your attention as well, council member. It just happens to be that it was one thing after another. We wanted to figure out how to make the timing work. And I know I can speak very, very candidly for this body that we all stand in support of everyone within our community and want to make sure that we make that voice heard and make folks feel supported and welcomed here in Santa Rosa. So with that, we'll bring it back at the next meeting. Did anybody else have anything for our council member report outs? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. That's excuse me. I'll take public comment really fast too on council member reports, just because we did give a substantial report, and see if there's anybody in the public who would actually like to participate as well. All right, I'm not seeing any. Madam City Clerk, did we have any voicemail public comments?
No, we did not.
Great. We'll move on to approval of the minutes then, item 11. We already heard that Councilmember Sawyer will be abstaining from this item. Were there any changes from council members on these minutes? Okay, we'll go ahead and see if there's any public comment on the minutes. And any voicemail public comments?
No, there were not.
Okay, we'll bring it back. Councilmember Alvarez, you have a question?
Well, more to clarification. It's concerning a comment that council member Victoria Fleming made in regards to the two alternates on one of the boards. If we actually got that clarified, if that was represented on the minutes for that meeting. And I wish I knew more of the details, but it just came to me that there was a question in regards to having two alternates opposed to only having or allowing only one alternate. I just can't remember the name of the board at this time. If any of us remember that comment, and I don't see Councilman.
I'm not certain what it is that council member that you're referring to.
It had to do with if two alternates were allowed on a certain board. I just wish that I remember what board that actually was. And I did go over the minutes, but I cannot. Apparently, if there's no issue, then there's no issue. It was just something that came to my mind, and I had to bring it forth. But apparently, it's mute.
All right, I'm not hearing any additional information. So Councilmember Fleming, if you're good, we'll show the minutes adopted as they stand.
I am indeed. Thank you.
Okay, no other objections from council? Great. We'll go ahead and show those adopted then, and we'll move on to the consent calendar, item number 12.
Item 12.1, resolution approval, issuance of blanket purchase order utilizing the State of California Cooperative Contract 1-19-58-69 with Geotab USA Incorporated Vehicle Telematics System. Item 12.2, resolution, authorization to submit a 2021 Early Relation Health Grant Program application to First Five of Sonoma County and committing any necessary matching funds. Item 12.3, resolution, professional services agreement with Architectural Resource Group to prepare a downtown station area historic resource evaluation. Item 12.4, resolution, appropriation of water budget for the previously approved refund of overpaid water demand fee to identified multifamily properties. Item 12.5, resolution, designating authorized city staff to enter into agreements with Governor's Office of Emergency Services, Cal OES. Item 12.6, resolution, authorizing certain city staff to enter into agreements and execute other documents with the California Housing and Community Development, HCD, for CDBG project development in response to the 2017 Tubbs fire. Item 12.7, ordinance adoption, second reading of the ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa, adding chapter 9-28 to the Title IX Health and Safety of the Santa Rosa City Code pertaining to fuel mitigation pile burning.
All right, council, are there any questions on the consent calendar? Councilmember Sweathelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a process question regarding 12.1. And so I'm not sure, Mr. McGlynn, who you want, but my question comes out, it sounds like we did an RFP, we evaluated proposals, listened to presentations, and the staff decided to go a whole different route. And I'm just not clear as to that process and why that wasn't done before we went through the whole RFP process.
Jason, do you want to cover that?
I actually may have staff online that may be better prepared to support that. Is Zach Brand available?
I'm here.
Zach, can you answer Councilmember Schwedhelm's question, please, about process?
I apologize, Councilmember. I didn't catch your entire question. I had a little glip there, but it sounds like you were wondering how we ended up in a state contract versus a standard RFP.
Well, in reading the staff report, it looks like an RFP went out. 3 departments were involved in the selection. It was evaluated. 7 proposals were received. 4 finalists were named. Went through that process. Council said, or staff made the recommendation going the route that we're going. And it just seemed like an odd order of doing things. So if I could just understand a little bit better as to why we chose to go this route versus the original RFP process that staff sat in on the panel and people prepared to make this presentation.
I understand. It was interesting. So we initiated RFP to find out the best product or best service available to the city for the services we're looking for. And 2 or 3 of the vendors, I think it was 2 of the vendors that responded to the RFP offered the state contract Geotab product as the best value for the city. But the way to get to that product is to use the state contract, and then the state contract subcontracts to those vendors to help us initiate the implementation. So the purchase order will not be issued to the vendor that responded to the RFP. The purchase order has to be issued to the state contract, to Geotab.
So we learned that information by going through the process, and then this process that we've agreed to is in the best interest and most efficient way for the city to do it.
That is correct.
Great. Thank you. I now understand it.
All right, thank you for the clarification, council member. Are there any other questions for staff on the consent calendar? Councilmember Tibbetts.
Just a comment for the vice mayor, if you could pull item 12.3 and do it separately. I'm going to recuse from that item out of an abundance of caution because the organization I work for owns a property in the downtown station area. So that's the reason.
All right, I appreciate that out of an abundance of caution. Let's go ahead and go to the public and see if there are any public comments on the consent calendar. If you are interested in speaking on any of the items here, go ahead and hit the raise hand feature on your Zoom. So anyone speaking on items 12.1 through 12.7. All right, I'm not seeing any hands. Let's go ahead and see if there are any voicemail comments.
There's one.
Consent item 12.6, Community Development Block Grant Funds. Dwayne DeWitt from Roseland. According to stipulations of the United States Housing.
My apologies, Mayor. All right. Accidental click.
Community direction for funds to help the affected community, those folks that suffered during the Tubbs fire. They should be a part of the decision-making process. It shouldn't just be left up to the local bureaucrats who already usually have their plans set before any of this stuff goes forward. Please empower those residents who were directly affected by the Tubbs fire to participate in the planning and the actual deliberations, the discussions about how the money will be spent from community development block grant funds. Otherwise, you're violating the U.S. Housing Urban Development Guidelines and not doing it as they truly want it to be done. Thank you.
Mayor, that concludes voice message public comments on consent.
Great, thank you so much. We'll go ahead and bring it back. And Madam Vice Mayor, I think we've got two motions to go through.
I move items 12.1, 12.2, and 12.4 through 12.7 and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
So we've got a motion from the Vice Mayor, a second from Councilmember Schwedhelm. Madam City Clerk, go ahead and call the roll.
Thank you. Councilmember Tibbetts.
Aye.
Councilmember Schwedhelm.
Aye.
Councilmember Sawyer.
Aye.
Councilmember Fleming.
Aye.
Councilmember Alvarez.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Rogers.
Aye.
Mayor Rogers.
Aye.
That motion passes with 7 ayes.
I would also like to move item 12.3 and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
All right, motion by the Vice Mayor, second by Councilmember Sawyer. Let's call the roll.
Councilmember Schwedhelm.
Aye.
Councilmember Sawyer.
Aye.
Councilmember Fleming.
Aye.
Councilmember Alvarez.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Rogers.
Aye.
Mayor Rogers.
Aye.
That motion passes with 6 ayes with Councilmember Tibbetts recusing.
All right. It's not 5 o'clock yet, so we'll go ahead and skip our public comments for non-agenda items. We'll come back after item 14.1. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, item 14.1, report, Sonoma County Water Agency, Sonoma Water 20 transmission budget and rate increase. We're being led off by Kimberly Zanino, Deputy Director of Water Admin.
Good
Good afternoon, Mayor Rogers, Vice Mayor, and members of the council. Tonight, we are bringing you a review of Sonoma Water's water transmission budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Ms. Roselli from Sonoma Water will provide you a detailed review of the proposed budget, but I will first start by giving you a brief update on the work that leads up to the approval process for Sonoma Water. Each year, the City Council reviews this budget and decides on a recommendation for the city's representative to the Water Advisory Committee, or the WAC, currently Councilmember Schwedhelm. Prior to the City Council deciding on a recommendation, there are multiple reviews made by different committees and boards. The first step is a budget subcommittee of the Technical Advisory Committee, or what we call the TAC. We meet to review the budget in detail and work with Sonoma Water to arrive at the final proposed wholesale rate increase. This year's subcommittee consisted of representatives from Sonoma Water, Town of Windsor, City of Cotati, City of Santa Rosa, North Marin Water District, Marin Municipal Water District, and the City of Sonoma. The first proposal from Sonoma Water had the wholesale rate increase at 6.56% for the Santa Rosa Aqueduct. However, after several meetings, communications, and considerations for the current situation with the pandemic, there were several reductions made, and the final proposed wholesale rate increase for the Santa Rosa Aqueduct is 3.47%. The budget was unanimously approved for recommendation by the subcommittee. And after that process, the full TAC also reviewed the budget and also approved for recommendation, as well as a review and recommendation by the Board of Public Utilities. We are now requesting your consideration to recommend that Santa Rosa's WAC representative votes to approve recommendation to the Board of Directors of Sonoma Water. And with that, I will now turn over the presentation to Ms. Roselli, who will provide you with a review of the final proposed budget and wholesale water rate increase.
Good afternoon, Mayor, council members. Thank you for having me. I'm Lynn Roselli, Sonoma Water. I am the Administrative Services Division Manager. I've been with Sonoma Water for 12 years. And we have a brief presentation for you to discuss the proposed budget and rates for the water transmission system for next year. Next slide, please. So for those of you that are not as familiar with Sonoma Water's enterprises, we have water supply, the water transmission system, flood protection for many miles of streams and channels, 8 wastewater treatment and reuse facilities, and an energy and sustainability program. We will only be talking about the water transmission system today, and all of any revenue that any one of these enterprises receives has to be used for its intended purpose. So any revenue that we receive for the water rates goes only to the water transmission system. It does not get transferred to any of the other enterprises. Next slide, please. And again. So this is a 10,000-foot level map of the water transmission system. In the upper left-hand corner are the Mirabel-Wohler production facilities on the river, Russian River. And then there are 3 main aqueducts, Santa Rosa Aqueduct, Petaluma Aqueduct, Sonoma Aqueduct. We prepare a budget and rates for each aqueduct, and the customers on those aqueducts pay the rate for the aqueduct that they're on. And on the Santa Rosa Aqueduct, there is City of Santa Rosa and Town of Windsor. Next slide, please. So as Ms. Zunino mentioned, we engaged in a transparent and collaborative process in accordance with the restructured agreement for water supply that governs how we prepare the budget and the rates. The restructured agreement was signed by the 8 water contractors and Sonoma Water in 2006, and we use that to develop the budget and rates. It also governs a lot of the water supply issues associated with the water transmission system. We began developing this budget back in November. We prepared a draft and gave it to the Technical Advisory Budget Subcommittee in January. We talked about it with Ms. Zunino and Ms. Burke for those 2 months, and along with the other water contractors. The Technical Advisory Committee voted to make a recommendation to move the budget and rates forward to the Water Advisory Committee to recommend it. I've been making presentations to city and town councils so that they understand our budget a little bit better and understand how the rate was developed. And then the Water Advisory Committee will vote on April 5th, and our board will adopt it on April 20th, and that's required by the restructured agreement for water supply that we approve and adopt, that our board approves and adopts the budget and rates before the end of April. Next slide, please. So these are the budget categories: operations and maintenance. There are 4 sub-funds. There are 5 capital funds, and there's several debt service funds. And under the sub-funds, the water management fund is for the urban water management plan, which was completed, is being completed this fiscal year. So there are only minimal costs in next fiscal year, which we will be funding out of fund balance. The watershed planning and restoration sub-fund is the biological opinion, the National Marine Fisheries Service biological opinion that was signed in 2008 and is good for 15 years. I will be talking a little bit about the larger Dry Creek Habitat Enhancement Project that is budgeted in that watershed planning and restoration sub-fund. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with the budget for the hazard mitigation projects, construction projects. Santa Rosa would be responsible for the Mark-West Creek Crossing, Russian River Crossing, and the Santa Rosa Creek Crossing. The other 2 projects that are listed are on other aqueducts and are not the responsibility of the City of Santa Rosa. City of Santa Rosa only pays what is their share of those, of the Mark-West, Russian River, and Santa Rosa Creek Crossing projects. All 3 of those have offsetting FEMA grant funding and will be active in next fiscal year. The budget for these hazard mitigation projects is $5.4 million. Next slide, please. Other capital projects that don't quite fit under the title of a seismic hazard mitigation project. The first one there is Sonoma Booster Pump Station, which is on the Sonoma Aqueduct, so it doesn't get charged to the City of Santa Rosa. But there's also the Mirabel Dam bladder replacement and the Warm Springs Dam hydroturbine retrofit projects that will be active next year. They're both critical projects for water supply, and the Warm Springs Dam hydroturbine generates energy, energy, and provides a source of revenue to the water transmission system. And the budget for these other capital projects, this isn't a full list, but for these other ones, it's $4.3 million. The total for all of the capital projects is $9.7 million. Next slide, please. So on operations and maintenance side, we have cathodic protection on the Santa Rosa Aqueduct and the Russian River Cotati intertie that will be occurring. We have well pumps and valves and tank maintenance projects that are scheduled and that need to be done and cannot be deferred any further. We have a regional water supply resiliency study that the water contractors are participating in, and various other studies that will be ongoing in next fiscal year. The O&M budget is $30.5 million. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, the biological opinion compliance project is the Dry Creek Habitat Enhancement Phase 4 project, will be constructed next fiscal year. The water contractors are responsible for phases or miles 4, 5, and 6. The good part about this is that the Corps has committed to paying 65% of the costs, and the water contractor share is a 35% cost share. And that will again be active next fiscal year along with other biological opinion related activities. And we're in the 3rd driest year on record and looking at drought-like conditions. And so it's critically important that we have a robust conservation program and a water use efficiency program. We are working with the Sonoma Marin Saving Water Partnership and with the water contractors to support their water conservation and water use efficiency programs. We have weather irrigation controllers and Prop 1 grants and a Prop 84 grant, and some of those funds get passed through to the water contractors. So the budget for the sub-funds is $11.05 million. Next slide, please. So this is a comparison of next fiscal year's budget with this fiscal year's budget. And at the total line there, you can see that the budget for this year is $59 million and the budget for next year is $56 million. The biggest difference there is $3 million, which is pretty close to the capital projects difference. And we heard the contractors indicating to us that, you know, you still have to supply water to your customers. But some of your customers obviously can't pay due to the hardships of the pandemic. And so we made every effort we could to cut where we felt we could cut And we got the biggest bang for our buck in the capital projects line item. At the bottom there, you can see that we have the grants, use of fund balance, and bond proceeds, 16 million for this year and 8.5 million for next year. When you take the net budget for this year, it's 43 million, and the net budget for next year is 47 million. And that difference in the budget, it's what driving the rate increase. Next slide, please. This is a pie chart that just gives you a visual of where the budget is allocated. It's 54% operations and maintenance costs, 17% capital projects, 20% is for biological opinion compliance and water conservation, 9% is for debt service, and then we have the offsetting of about 8.5 million in grants, bonds, and use of fund balance. Next slide, please. So now that we have talked about the budget, we're going to switch to talking about how the rate is generated based on that budget. This is prescribed by the restructured agreement for water supply, and it takes cost of operations and maintenance and divides by the quantity of water sold. The quantity of water sold is the lesser of the 3-year annual average or the last 12 months of water deliveries. Again, whichever is less. Next. And as you can see here, next. As you can see here, next. And one more, sorry. Yeah, that's it. Okay, that's good. Thank you. You can see here that the 46,095 acre feet is the 3-year annual average. That is the lower of the two. And therefore that is what is used to determine the cost per acre foot. And if you hit next one more time, there you go. So you get your $1,000 per acre foot. 46,095 acre feet is the required budgeted amount. In drought years in the past, we've seen deliveries as low as 42,000 or 44,000 acre feet, which would be 2,000 acre feet less, which would end up cutting into the water rates revenue that we would receive, which would impact our budget. So we will be watching this very carefully next year. And this is in part why we didn't feel like we could go even lower with our rate increase because of the dry conditions. It's a uniform rate and it's a fully volumetric rate. So when the deliveries go up, your rate increase or rate goes down. And when your deliveries go down, your rate goes up. Next slide, please. And so we wanted to give you an example of what other wholesale water contractors are doing and where we compare. We're on the far left there at about $1,000 per acre foot. Zone 7 Water Agency indicated that they are not doing a rate increase this year, but they will be doing a 6.7% next year. Santa Clara Valley Water District is proposing in April a 9.8% rate increase, but that increase is not shown here because it hasn't been approved yet. San Francisco Public Utilities chose not to do a rate increase. Contra Costa Water District chose to do a 3.72% increase and another 3.75% the following year. And so that just gives you an example of where we are with respect to other water contractors, wholesale water contractors. Next slide, please. So as Ms. Zunino mentioned, your rate increase on the Santa Rosa Aqueduct is a total of 3.47%. It's $1,000 per acre foot. It is based on the full 3-year annual average deliveries of 46,095. And on the left-hand side, about 2/3 of the way down, you can see that there's a line that says discretionary charges. Those are capital charges to build fund balance for future capital projects. The water contractors on the Santa Rosa Aqueduct elected to reduce this value from last year. Last year it was, this fiscal year is actually $27 per acre foot. They reduced it to $20 per acre foot to get down to a rate increase of 3.47%. That capital charge, it helps build fund balance, but also acts as a rate stabilization tool that helps water contractors, reduce their rate in years when it's necessary, such as a year when we have a pandemic. Next slide, please. So we wanted to go over the budget and rate reduction measures that we implemented. We came in at initially at 6.56%, which we believed was what we needed to actually do what is needed to do and what we thought we could accomplish next year. We cut the rate increase down to 4.1%. And then Santa Rosa and Petaluma came back and reduced their aqueduct capital charge to come in at 3.47%. So we were able to save approximately 1.3 million. We did that by decreasing capital project costs, increasing use of fund balance. We reduced the water management, urban water management planning sub-fund rate to 0, and we decreased labor costs somewhat in water conservation without sacrificing the program itself. And in general, the rate increase on average is approximately 65 cents per household per month. And I know that in a pandemic, when you can't pay your rent and you can't pay your utilities, 65 cents per month increase is also not attainable. But it does seem as though there will be a turnaround with the rescue bill, and hopefully things will get back on track next year. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned, we're doing presentations. I believe this is my last one for this month. The Water Advisory Committee will meet on April 5th, and our board will adopt this rate and budget on April 20th. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Councilor, are there any questions on the presentation? All right. Seeing none, we'll go to public comment. If folks are interested in speaking on the item, go ahead and hit the raise hand feature on your Zoom. I'm not seeing any. Dina, did we have any voicemail public comments?
No, we did not, Mayor.
Okay, I'll go ahead and bring it back. Councilmember Sweathelm, I believe this is your item.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd make a motion to direct the Santa Rosa City Council Water Advisory Committee representative to support the Sonoma County Water Agency fiscal year 2021-2022 water transmission budget during the April 5th, 2021 WAC meeting.
I'd like to second that.
Okay, we have a motion from Councilmember Sweathelm and a second from the Vice Mayor. Let's go ahead and call the roll.
Councilmember Tibbetts. Councilmember Tibbetts.
Councilmember Tibbetts had to leave the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Schwedhelm.
Aye.
Councilmember Sawyer.
Aye.
Councilmember Fleming.
No.
Councilmember Alvarez.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Rogers. Was that a aye?
Sorry, aye.
Thank you. And Mayor Rogers.
Aye.
That motion passes with 5 ayes, with Councilmember Fleming voting no and Councilmember Tibbetts absent.
Okay. So that's our only action item of the evening. We don't have any public hearings. So we will take a quick 5-minute break and we'll come back at 5 o'clock for our public comment for non-agenda items to finish up the meeting. All right, Madam City Clerk, I'm just looking for one more council member to turn on their camera. There we go. Let's go ahead and call the roll.
Okay. Councilmember Schwedhelm?
Here.
Councilmember Sawyer? Councilmember Sawyer?
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Fleming?
Still here.
Councilmember Alvarez? Vice Mayor Rogers? Mayor Rogers?
Here.
Councilmember Alvarez, have you joined us?
I'm sorry, Stephanie. I am here. There's a double mute to the process. I'm sorry, but I am present.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Rogers, have you joined us? Okay, let the record show that all council members are present with the exception of Councilmember Tibbetts and Vice Mayor Rogers.
All right, thank you so much. So we left off, we have public comment for non-agenda items. So for folks in the public, if you'd like to speak on non-agenda items, go ahead and hit the raise hand feature or hit *9 if you're participating via phone. Madam City Clerk, I'm not seeing any. So let's see if there are any voicemail comments.
We have 2 coming right your way.
Hi, this is Eris Weaver, Executive Director of the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition, with a comment on agenda item number 13, items not on the agenda. I'd like to thank Mayor Rogers for his efforts in promoting our Bike to It campaign, which is encouraging residents to bicycle rather than drive to destinations that are within 2 miles, which constitute 30% of trips taken in the area. I'd also like to thank the city for including information on this in our other programs on both your climate action planning webpage and in the e-newsletter. So far, we've had 75 people sign on to this challenge so far, which will continue throughout the rest of the year. I'd also like to let you know that we are currently hiring. We are looking for a bilingual outreach and education coordinator to assist us in addressing transportation inequity by adapting our programs and activities to better identify and meet the needs of Sonoma County Latino communities. We appreciate any help in spreading the word. Finally, our entire staff participated in the National Bike Summit organized by the League of American Bicyclists, learning from our colleagues around the country, as well as lobbying our representatives regarding bicycle-related legislation. A surprise keynote from Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg was one of the highlights of the event. And having a bicyclist in that role is so amazing and so important. And I think we are going to see so much more new funding and support for improving active transportation infrastructure. So we are all feeling inspired and renewed in our commitment to make Santa Rosa and Sonoma County the best place to ride a bike. Thanks.
Item 13, public comment on non-agenda items. Wayne DeWitt from Roseland. Please open up our city hall and our city government to the residents again. If restaurants can be opened and banks and supermarkets and gas stations and all sorts of other services as essential businesses, city government should be seen as essential business also and opened up to us citizens and residents to again be able to participate fully in the process, which has been exclusionary for over a year now. With that in mind, hopefully you folks are paying attention to the Roseland Creek Greenway Trail and how funding for that should be secured as soon as possible. It's been over 10 years since the process was started. Well, excuse me, actually 17 years with the Roseland Creek concept plan, which a $100,000 grant of taxpayers' money paid for. And then 10 years since the property was purchased at the highest price ever paid for Roseland real estate in 2011 for $2.5 million of taxpayers' money for less than 6 acres of land. that Greenway Trail should go forward and you folks should be leading the way. With that in mind, money could come from the purchasing of the new fire station. That could be done much cheaper. It should be built with fireproof materials such as aircrete, which is far less expensive than what's being proposed now. This whole new fire station seems like a bit of a boondoggle. Actually, not a bit. It's a big boondoggle, 4 times the cost of the previous one. Folks, don't rip us off. Please, this is important to treat us fairly. And last but not least, redwood tree removals. In the city of Santa Rosa, redwood trees frequently are very large, and they should be considered heritage-type trees because they're the best at CO2 sequestration. But it appears you don't need a permit to cut them down. The city of Santa Rosa's cut them down on the city property, and now over in Roseland, large redwood trees are being cut down, apparently without permits. Please, tell us if permits are necessary. You could at least answer that question during this time period. Thank you kindly.
Mayor, that concludes voice message public comments. You're muted, sir.
Great. I do see that there is one additional hand that's popped up, so I'll go ahead and give an opportunity for Alex to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Mayor Rogers, council members. I want to thank you, Mayor Rogers, for responding to me last week about the current situation and code and policy that has to do with small cell installation. And I'd just like to say that, you know, I understand you guys have some pretty hefty priorities and really important things, but, you know, this isn't like dealing with the homeless situation or rebuilding an entire city's infrastructure to be more fire resilient. We're talking about just a simple council policy on a very important new technology that's being introduced into our city. And clearly, right, this current policy is inadequate. You know, we've had 4 study sessions, and the amount of staff time and effort that was into those, you know, it seems like at this, you know, by now we could have an updated policy that is more beneficial to Santa Rosa and to neighborhoods. And forgive me, some of my comments are pointed, and I don't mean to offend anybody. I just feel, you know, that maybe the city manager, you know, his relationship with some of the most powerful companies in the United States is important, and maybe he's delaying this process, you know, because it just seems like we've got new council members, and, you know, this is easily put on the back burner as time goes on. But remember then Mayor Corsi, how he said Verizon ran roughshod through the neighborhoods. It was a pretty big issue and problem that is we're still susceptible to with the current policy in place. And I just don't want you guys to lose sight of that. And, you know, I just don't see why it's going to take another several months to get an updated policy on something that will give you guys a little bit more local control. Because right now we're still just sitting ducks, and they can drop a bunch of applications anywhere they want in town, really. And I think we're just hoping they're not going to do that and put them in inappropriate places. So anyhow, thank you for your time. And, you know, I hope that you've learned from your constituents that this is a bigger problem than just small cells. I hope you guys don't trust this engineer, Hemet, guys like that in AT&T and Verizon saying that their technology's safe, because it's not. And I'm not a bad guy here. I really just want this Santa Rosa to be a healthy place for you, me, our families to live. And that's really all my interest is in this topic. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. And we really appreciate you taking the time to keep pushing. So council, I don't see any other additional hands. As was mentioned previously, we will definitely be adjourning tonight's meeting in memory of Danny Rizzo. And I hope that his family is doing well, and we're obviously wishing them the best. With that, we'll go ahead and adjourn, and I'll see you all soon.